Hi, I'm here today to show you how to make a simple friendship bracelet using a knotting system. I'm going to show you using large yarn just so that you'll be able to see the movements and what you're actually supposed to be doing. It's this kind of yarn. People usually use it to crochet, but for this purpose we're going to be making a bracelet. Normally you would use embroidery thread such as this. You can pick, comes in a variety of colors, so you can do St. John's colors, your favorite colors, whatever you want to use. But like I said, for the purpose of being able to instruct you, I'm going to use a larger gauge yarn today. So what you'll want to do is get all your materials. You may remember this book from when you were younger. I like to use a large children's picture book to have a working surface and tape the bracelet, the yarn to it, so that I can have something to hold it in place while I'm working. I'm going to start by getting the length of yarn that I need for the bracelet. You'll want to use more than you'll need. You may think, oh, bracelet's small, so I'll just use, that much, but that's not the case. You'll want to have extra to tie it around your wrist or your ankle whenever you're done. So just be really generous with the amount and use probably a lot more than you need, especially when you're starting out and doing this the first couple times. Once you go along and start making more of them, you can kind of gauge how much thread or yarn you'll be needing, and you won't have to waste as much. So what I'm going to do is cut a piece of yarn, as I said, pretty long. Set that aside. I'm using a red yarn, kind of a dark teal, and you'll want to make them all the same size. So you'll want to make sure they're the same length. Pull them out. Well, this one's pretty long. Let's see. Okay, so same length. Cutting. You'll probably need a good pair of sharp scissors for this, just so it cuts the yarn effectively and you don't have to struggle with and fray the yarn or the thread that you're using, because frayed yarn or thread works less well when you go to cut it and tie it off. Let's see. Okay, I'm using 3 colors today. You can use however many colors you want. Sorry, that's my cat. She is curious. You'll want to start with colors that you can see the difference in, instead of using very similar like colors, because it'll be easier to tell your yarn or your thread apart when you start the knotting process. Okay, so almost ready to start. I've got 3 separate colors of yarn here. And like I said, I would start with 3 if you're a beginner. Whenever you get more advanced and are able to pay close attention and focus really well, you can use up to like 6 colors or so. When you start using more colors, it gets trickier keeping the thread separate when you're actually doing the knotting for the bracelet. You want to use some, I like to use clear packing tape instead of Scotch tape for when I'm working to tape down the bracelet, just so you'll have some tension to pull the bracelet while you're working. It makes for sharper, tighter knots. So I'm going to set my tape aside that I'll tape it down with, and this is the length of the yarn that we're using. I'm going to double it like this and make sure it's even. All the thread the yarn, excuse me, is in 2 lengths. Then I'm going to take all of those at the top where it's a loop, and I'm going to just simply knot that, all the pieces together, knot them in one big loop and tie that off. So you've got, this is where you'll be pulling, where you'll start your knotting. Then you'll want to kind of lay out the thread. This is where you'll probably want to tape it down. As I said, it helps with the tension to make tighter knots. And taping that down. Now in this case, you'll want to get the thread in the order of the color pattern that you'll want it. So you're going to straighten out each piece. So ultimately the bracelet will be this color pattern here, the lighter teal, the darker teal, and then the red. So I'm going to, even though they're lying on top and below each other, I'm going to separate these out and kind of set these two to the side because these are my working strings here. So I'm starting with the light teal. This is a really simple process once you learn it. At first, it's just you've got to focus on it while you're doing it because you can't forget which thread you're on or which piece of yarn you're on. So I'm going to start by pulling the first string and making a number 4 over the second string. And then I'll pull that under and pull the knot very taut at the top. This is where the tape comes in to hold and make sure that the tension is taut. Do this 2 times with each piece of thread. Number 4, go under, pull through, pull tight. So I'm done with this second string, but I'm still using this first string, and I'm going to go over to my second color of yarn and pull that, pull the first string, make a number 4, loop under, pull it through, pull taut, and do it again. You'll want to do each piece of yarn or thread twice. Where you have to pay attention. Your bracelet will look funky if you make it 1 knot only or 3 knots. So you've got to do 2 on each piece of thread or yarn. Taut, working on the second, pulling that through, and then moving on to the next color. A visitor. Very helpful. Pulling through, pulling taut. And at first it's going to look kind of funky when you're starting out with the first couple of strands, but once you start getting further and further down on your bracelet, it will start to make a pattern that looks similar throughout. Pulling taut. So we're done with that first string. Now we're going to take the second lighter teal string and do the same thing we just did through all these strings again. So you'll start the process all over again. Take your first string, you can move these out of the way, just keep them in the order that they're in. They've got an order now, so you want to keep all the strings untied and in that same order. And you'll start all over, make the number 4, pull the string under and pull it through the loop and pull taut. Once more for the second time, pull through, pull taut. Now we're moving on to the second of the dark teal. You want to put the strings that you're not working with, you want to make sure they're out of the way so you don't actually accidentally get caught on them or loop them in. Little tot. Again, little tot. Now we're moving on to the red. Moving these out of the way. And number 4, going under, pulling through the loop, pulling up. So as you can see, it's just a simple knotting procedure. It just takes time and concentration because you don't want to loop a string too many times or get a string tangled. It's important to keep your threads you're not working with out of the way. Second time, moving on to the last. Number 4, under, pull tot. Number 4, pull under, pull tot. And as you can see, your book may move, but just try to keep it steady so that you can work with all your strings and not get them mixed up. So we have made, it doesn't look like much, but we've made our first 2 strands of the bracelet with this light color. So now we're going to move on to the next color in our pattern, which is the dark teal, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. Start with the first string, make a number 4 over the second string, pull it through the loop, and pull a tot. Same thing again for the second time. As you can see, this is a repetitive craft, much like knitting or crocheting. It's just repeating the same movement over and over. But it's kind of fun and therapeutic, and it's neat to come up with different fun color combinations. Make them for your friends, obviously. People that you love and care about. Show them that with the little friendship bracelet. I've certainly given out my share. Through, moving on, moving to the last color, first string of the last color. You can probably guess when there's more strings that you're working with, more colors that you're adding, it gets a little bit more challenging when you're working with a lot more strings. But this simple 3 color bracelet should be easy for a beginner to start out with, managing the strings for 3. Next red. And you can make these less tight if you want to, the knots less tight if you want to. It's just going to make the bracelet look a little bit chunkier and less uniform. The tighter and closer together you make the knots, the more it looks just in my opinion, it looks a little bit neater when you make the knots tighter. This is a fun, fairly inexpensive craft that you can do pretty much anywhere. I like to sit outside and do it when it's nice, when it's not too hot. Or of course you can do it inside. So as you can see, we're starting to get some of our design. The pattern is starting to form. We're now going to take the last color in our pattern and start string, go over with the number 4, pull under, pull taut. It's kind of easy to get distracted when you're doing this. So if you do have to stop and you're like in the middle of a bracelet, I always like to stop. Instead of, for instance, stopping right now at this point, I would wait until I had taken at least this red string through all these strings. That way I know that I've made all my knots for that string, and I don't need to go back and make more knots and get confused and add more knots than I need. You don't have to do this on a table. You can put the book in your lap. And if you're like sitting on the couch or something, it's very portable. Okay, now we're on the next red. This is just really a simple knot. There are so many different kinds of knots, and if you want to learn how to make fancier, more patterned bracelets, there are a lot of YouTube tutorials. As you can imagine, there's many YouTube tutorials on pretty much anything you want to make or do. So if this interests you and you can perfect this simple bracelet, I would encourage you to move on and try to add some fancy patterns into your bracelets. I have not gotten to that point yet, but it is something that I'm working toward. So now you can kind of see our 3-color pattern. And then this just repeats over and over until you're done with your bracelet. So as you can see, we're back at the beginning now with the light colored teal. And we're just going to start over again. I'm now going to show you how to make a bracelet using a smaller gauge thread instead of yarn. So you'll need all the same materials. Instead though, we'll be using yarn. So you'll need some packing tape. I like packing tape because it's stronger than Scotch tape. You'll need a sharp pair of scissors, and of course you'll need your embroidery thread. I'm using 3 colors that are similar to St. John's colors for this bracelet. You can use any color that you'd like. There are limitless possibilities if you ever visit a craft store and go to the embroidery aisle. Literally any color you want. We're still working on the 3-strand bracelet for this video, just because it's simpler to learn when you're starting out with 3 strands instead of many different strands, many colors. I'm going to take my quite long embroidery thread and I'm going to fold it in half. I'm taking the one long continuous piece and I'm folding it in half. And then I'm going to make sure that the ends meet up. So here's the top, and I'm going all the way down here, and I'm going to make sure that the ends are even. And they're pretty even. Nothing has to be perfect or exact when you're doing this. It's just a bracelet and it's just for fun. So after I have those 2 pieces, loop at the top, I am going to tie this top piece into a knot. So I'm just going to wrap that around my finger, go over the threads, and then come back under and make a knot, and make sure you're pulling through all 3 colors. So you have a nice big knot at the top, and that's what you'll eventually use to tie your bracelet. I'm then going to tape down the strings above the knot, or right on the knot, over the book. And as I said in the first video, you'll need a picture book, a large, maybe the smallest I would use is probably 8 by 11. So that's what I'm working with now. And so this is going to be our pattern for our bracelet. It's going to continue throughout. Maybe light with pale gold and vivid gold. We're just going to continue over and over until we make a bracelet to our desired length. So after you've made your bracelet to the length that you want, I'm going to show you how to tie off the bracelet. This is obviously not a full bracelet. You'll just keep going and repeating the pattern all the way down. But for the purpose of instruction, I will show you how to tie off the end of the bracelet so that you can tie it around your wrist. So you'll take your thread, and there are a couple different ways you can do this, but one of the ways I like to do it is to make two sections and use each of these, and you're just going to do a traditional braid. So you'll just start that, and if you're not familiar with the traditional braid, you have 3 strings and you're going to fold each one over in an alternating pattern. One goes over, then the other, then you pull the one from the bottom. And you just braid it to your desired length. And then you can tie that end off. You pull sometimes you have to work with it. Well, I may have made this one a little too short. It's a little bit harder to work with this thread because it is so thick. I might just leave that one like that. And then you'll come over here and do the same thing to this side. Sometimes I like to pull, the further down the bracelet I go, I like to pull the tape off and put it closer to the part of the string that I'm working with. And you can take the tape off. Obviously this would be a lot longer for a normal bracelet, for a normal person's wrist, but this was just an instruction, so you can then tie it around your wrist using